Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, How to Maintain Donors Acquired During the COVID-19 Crisis. Thank you guys for joining us. I know how busy you all are right now, and I know that we are going to be able to provide some really great information for you today. So during this webinar, we want to make sure that we answer your questions and address any comments that you might have. So during the webinar, click on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submit your question through there, and we will be sure to answer it. If there's a question we're not able to get to during this webinar, we'll forward it to someone on our team that can get with you and answer that question for you. So we have two speakers here with us today, Andy Laudano and Jarred Schremmer. Andy is Senior Vice President of Client Service at RKD Group and brings with him 25 years of fundraising experience. And so he's got some great information and background around maintaining maintaining disaster donors. And we've got Jarred Schremmer, Vice President of Digital Media and Strategy, who can bring some experience related to the digital media forefront and how you can talk to those donors in a digital space. So what are we seeing right now? So as you guys all know, many of you are seeing this enormous increase in donations. You've got lots of new donors coming in, either through your acquisition programs, through online donations, or maybe they just gave because they saw a news story or were feeling compelled to give and chose your organization to send a donation in. And after that, we know in a phase 2, there will be this slump in giving. And so we want to make sure that you guys all have strategies that can help you ride the waves that will come after this bump phase. And a lot of that will come through maintaining these donors that you've acquired during the crisis. So that's what brings us here today, where we will answer, how can I retain these donors that I've acquired during the crisis? We'll answer that question in a few ways. One, we want to establish what's unique about these disaster donors. What is it about these guys that means that they should be treated differently from your regular acquisition donors that you see come in outside of a crisis? We'll also talk through some historically best practices for retaining disaster donors and how those may or may not apply to this COVID crisis, and then also share some good examples of how those best practices have been applied in the past. So first, let's talk about what makes emergency donors different. And I'll go ahead and let Jarred dive into that.
What's happening in the country, what's happening in their city, in their neighborhood, et cetera, and they're wanting to respond to that. And so, one of the first questions that I always encourage organizations to consider when they think about this is, as you had new donors coming in and responding out of this emotion, were they giving to things that are still a core or central part of your mission, or did you as an organization prop up a special effort or a special fund or a unique component to who you are that was very temporary in time? If you're a food bank, people wanting to take care of hungry people, that's going to be relevant. If you're a hospital that's taking care of sick people and you're taking care of healthcare workers, like that's still going to be relevant. If you're an organization that needed to create a very special effort that you were doing for a short period of time, you're going to want to remember that, and remember that as people that gave to you there, that at least was their first motivation to interact with you, and that may or may not have a strong tie to your mission or your organization. The other thing that's really interesting is your emergency donors might not be local. And if you're an organization that is typically serving in a specific city, state, region, what we've historically found is that when it comes to a disaster, when it comes to an emergency, you can get people engaging and interacting with you from all over the country, but that also could really demonstrate that they have a different level of affinity to your organization. I mean, we've seen this with some of the areas, you see the map here, and obviously some areas of our country have been hit much harder by the virus. And we've seen organizations that are on the ground in those areas see an outpouring of response from people from all over the country. But it's really going to be critical to notice the difference in the donors that were coming outside of your typical service or region, service area or region when you think about your upcoming plans. And then, most importantly, and obviously the reason for this this webinar today is they're going to behave differently afterwards. They're less likely to be retained and to be tightly aligned with your mission. And so, we really see it as the opportunity to quickly engage, to most importantly steward, and ultimately try to determine and establish those new people that have come on, who are the ones you can cultivate and retain into long-term donors, and who are those individuals that if you continue to try to communicate and engage with could come at a significant cost without a healthy return. And so, when we think about them, behaving differently afterwards, there's a breakdown on, and this goes back a couple of years from a disaster response. I think we have the next slide, Suzanne. From 2017, 31% of the households that donated disaster relief. The following year, only 5% of those households continue to provide a relief for those disasters, meaning that you see that what brought them in or engaged them as that need disappeared, their continued support for those efforts changes. And that's why it's so important to really start thinking about that communication you have for them. And most importantly, not to wait a year later, but to think right away about that.
So, thanks, Jared. History shows these disaster donors take one of three paths. And the first path would be, and the most ideal one, would be to convert to mission-focused donors. In other words, you send them another communication as part of your regular communication track, direct mail or digital, and they give you another gift. The second one is that you can maintain a relationship, but again, because these are emotion-driven donors like Jared talked about before, it really takes a future emergency or something extremely urgent to try to get them to give another gift. And the third is that they never return to give again. And this is really important to identify if you consider what Jared said in the slide before, that historically, disaster donors, only 5% of them were retained. So how can we change that dynamic? I think the first part is recognizing and setting up your database so that you segment these disaster donors separately. This is important for tracking and analyzing going forward, because we know they're not going to retain like a newly acquired donor. So until they behave, until you identify one of those three outcomes, they give another gift to a more mission-driven package, you need to continue to identify them as emergency donors. When another emergency comes, make sure you take that segment of donors, even if they may be a little more lapsed, and get them into the select, because these are a prime audience as emotion-driven donors. And then the third is don't put them in your regular appeal, but to really look at how they might give differently. Conversely, it's also important to identify those donors with larger capacity, because what you do see occasionally, and you always see at least one or two or three of them, is these exceptional gifts. These people who you've never had give before, who give at a high level. And we want to be able to also take them and make sure that they get directed to your major or mid-major donor officer, so that they can reach out with a phone call and thank them, talk to them and cultivate them as part of the organization. Communicate, make sure you're communicating how their exceptional gift was being used, and then invite them to follow on social media, subscribe to updates, really start to get them to feel like an insider, and to be very, very welcoming into their mission. That's really very, very important. Then finally, we need to look at what is it that we're going to do from an acknowledgement standpoint. While we normally send out our new welcome donor package to new donors, we want to be able to acknowledge that this was a special type of gift, and then give them an opportunity to start educating them on the core mission. This is, think of the emergency donor as the first date, or maybe even the meeting them in some social media, Bumble or something. It's like, it's the swipe right, swipe left, right? So think of these people as people that are more of a warm prospect, and this is your opportunity to educate them about the organization. And then also give them an update on how you're doing with the crisis. Let them know that you know who they are and what they did with what you did with their gifts. Resonating that will bring them back to the emotions they feel at the time that they gave the gift in the first place. So,
Andy, we had one question come in, when a donor does swipe right, how should you go about coding those people?
So there's a couple ways that you can do it. You can either create on the donor base, if you have a blank field that you can put a flag on your database as emergency donor. That would be one way. The second is to just code the responses so that going forward, that source code would be dedicated to COVID, or to the appeal that went out asking for donations for COVID, or for the emergency, whether it was wildfires or whatever the need may be.
So, and kind of building off of that, being intentional about your messaging is so key. And so acknowledging who those donors are, what they gave to, is really the first and most critical step to having success with building a relationship with them. And what Andy touched on is so important, because if somebody gave because they, back to one of these drivers that we were talking about, it's inspired by emotion. It's inspired by this great need that they want to resolve. Here we have an example of Houston Food Bank, and this is what we did in response to Hurricane Harvey. Just imagine this: somebody is right in the midst of seeing all of the issues and challenges and pain that Hurricane Harvey caused in Houston, and they want to respond and give back to, or they want to respond and give to Houston Food Bank because they know that people are hungry, they're without, food, they're out of their homes, etc. Imagine getting an acknowledgement email back, or a thank you message back in the mail, etc., that just says, thank you for your gift to Houston Food Bank. Or your gift to Houston Food Bank helps us provide, food to children and families all year long. That's going to create a huge disconnect versus here acknowledging their support for the crisis. With your support, we've distributed 16 million pounds of food, waters, and supplies. Now all of a sudden they're a part of something. And then let's put a face on that. The face of Elisa, who moved to Houston 7 months before Harvey hit. she and her 2-month-old daughter lost everything. These are the types of people that you were a part of helping. And when we think about what starts building a bond or a connection between a donor and an organization, one of the pillar pieces is trust. We do extensive research projects and, works with partners, and we're identifying audiences and prospects to go after. If you don't have trust with your prospects and with your donors, the likelihood of acquiring and retaining those individuals goes way down. When you build trust, when you demonstrate that you were, good stewards of the money that they gave to your organization, and you delivered on the needs that existed that they wanted to respond to, that trust and that bond will grow stronger. Here's another example where, try to be as specific as you can. And so, with SPCA of Texas, when it was looking at, how did we go about solving or helping resolve these issues as funds were coming in for Hurricane Harvey, what were we doing? Let's be really specific. You can see even in this example, kind of providing a detailed calendar of big events, things that were accomplished because of what you were a part of. So I'd encourage you as an organization, think about what we've been doing in response to COVID. What have been those steps? How have dollars been put to use? Whose lives have been changed? And start, immediately getting that information together. And as soon as you can, start getting that back out to these donors that gave, so that they know that they not only made a good decision to make a gift in response to this disaster, but even more importantly, that you as an organization is ensuring that that gift is making the biggest impact it possibly can on the communities you're serving. And this is something that oftentimes organizations shy away from, but we know it's so key, is that when you're outlining your responses to this and what you've done, don't be afraid to talk about additional support. Where we will go back to individuals and have said, this is where the need still exists. This is what's still happening. This is why we still need your support. And even when we've acknowledged that we've received, we've thanked them, we've acknowledged their gift, we've shown their gift in action, even within the same disaster, we can go back and tell them we still need continued support. If you get a second gift from donors, the likelihood of them being a donor that will stay on with you post-disaster grows exponentially. And so, don't be afraid to ask again, especially, when we think about the COVID crisis we're in right now, and the fact that it's going to be going on for weeks and weeks, if not months and months. Just because somebody's given to this once doesn't mean you can't go back to them and talk about the ongoing need. And then, when you continue to update, so even after you get outside of the crisis, don't be afraid to continue to make connections with what you did and how people have been impacted. So whether it's stories of individuals who were really served well by your organization during this time, you can talk about that for months later. You can circle back. We've done, annual reminders of, the great work, the people's lives that were positively impacted by organizations as a result of an emergency that happened, 2 months ago, 6 months ago, even a year ago. You can still maintain that connection, and you can find that point, that driving piece that ultimately brought somebody into your organization in the first place, and potentially get them to engage again.
So thanks, Jared. The question becomes, when do you need to get out for the next gift? And certainly, you want to try to get within the first 60 days, within the first 30 days, ideally. Let me qualify that by saying you first need to acknowledge their support and get that acknowledgement with communication, further educating the donor about the mission of the organization, so that when you go out with your next communication asking support, you can go out and ask them for a gift based on the dedication of the mission. What's important for this audience is that you remind them of their previous support. They may have given in a time of emotion from a list that they saw of organizations that are, doing good work for that disaster. Make sure you segment them as disaster donors. Don't put them in with your 0 to 12-month donors and expect that they're going to perform as 0 to 12-month donors. They need to be segmented with a realistic expectation. And this is why I was saying you really need to code those donors so you know who they are, so you can segment them and analyze the performance. It's important that you remind them that even though the crisis may be over, their support is still needed. We did this for Coast Guard Foundation, where it was during the government shutdown, and service members were looking at serving our country without getting compensation. So Coast Guard Foundation, which is dedicated to supporting and improving the lives of Coast Guard men and women, it was a great message for them at a time of uncertainty in terms of whether they were going to get paid. But the need continues on even after the budget got passed. So we didn't forget. We know who they are. We segment them. We analyze them, and we really look at that. And really, the next thing is to maintain the connection with the crisis. This is the first time in our nation's history that service members in the U.S. Armed Forces have not been paid during a lapse in appropriation. So, remind them the urgent reason they gave in the past, and then circle back to the, mission of the organization, and really tie in what inspired them to give in the first place and how it relates to what you're currently doing now going forward with the organization. And then make sure you provide a relevant second gift opportunity. Jared, you could probably talk more about solutions, but make sure that mission is in there, and that with the second gift, you're giving them that information. I don't know if you want to add something there.
Yeah, so just within the context of this, as we're going back with a timely second gift, the fact of the matter is Salesian Missions as an organization responds to emergencies and disasters all over the world, and they have these donors that have given to that, and to be able to tap back into this message of whether it's floods or mudslides or earthquakes or hurricanes, we've been actively engaging and meeting the needs of children and youth. And so to be able to tap into that so it feels relevant, we're talking about these immediate needs and people in challenging and difficult situations and circumstances, and these are the people we're helping, that becomes so important or critical. If you're an organization that has a few different components and programs to your organization, don't just automatically throw them into, well, this was our next messaging going out for an appeal, we're going to give this to all of our donors, or we're going to give this to all of our disaster donors. Really think, is it a program? Is it a appeal offer that is going to feel relevant, and are we going to try to connect it as closely as possible to what originally motivated them to give, as we try to start expanding out their overall interest in your program's mission?
I had a question come in with resource gathering being tough right now, which I'm sure is majorly impactful for those organizations on the front line. How can they incorporate storytelling in these communications if they're focused on other parts of operations right now?
Well, I'll jump in and answer that, because I think, digital is definitely a place where we're, recommending timely communication and more frequent communication. And so, there's elements of storytelling that we're saying you would want and need to work into those touch points. But I would say that don't feel overwhelmed by the quality of content that the quantity of content that you have. Or the depths of stories and informations. I mean, it can be as you might not have the whole background on a person that came in for your services, but if you can, have approval to say, we had Lisa with her 2 children that came in just yesterday, and this, this provided the help that they, just the help that they needed right now. Starting to put a name to that. You don't have to, have the deep content gathering. You might not have a ton of information on everything that's happening, but once again, when we talk about reporting back, you might not have every single detail, but to say, what, we're we wanted to let you know that we're preparing X amount of meals for people. We're doing this for all of these healthcare workers. We've made X, Y, and Z adjustments. So even if it's just a few basic points, as you share that, people understand right now that, one, things are changing quickly. It's it is a rapidly evolving situation. 2, they know that as an organization, you have, you're out there on the front lines getting work done. And so, you're not going to have this perfectly produced video, or you might not have, all the deep details as things are happening right now. But if you can just give them little points and nuggets that as they come in and you can share that, it's going to build up that trust and confidence with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I would just say from the direct mail side, your emergency appeals in general are challenging because you're taking what is normally a 12-week process in best of times and condensing it down to 36 hours, 48 hours. So you're really in a condensed time frame. I always try with our clients to do a couple things. One is have a regular source of communication. In other words, your PR marketing departments or whatever. If there's something that is shared internally amongst the organization, share it with your direct response agency as well, so that they're getting that information at the same time you might be getting the information. That saves a lot of time and also can be an inspiration for the agency to bring up topics that they're reading about, to say, hey, this might make a good topic just in, like I said, in regular times. But if that channel of communication is already established, that facilitates a much better opportunity for us to have the meaningful content. The second thing is you don't really need a lot during an emergency. They know who you are. What they really need is a way to respond. You're giving them a way to respond. Most of our letters are one-page letters that look kind of grassroots. That doesn't have a lot of the design that goes along with a typical direct mail copy. It's usually, we call it a down and dirty sometimes. It's like a one-page letter that's just a lot of that's a very personalized but simple letter. So it doesn't need to be a lot. It's more about timing.
All right, so just kind of moving along here. One thing we did want to just call out here is be really thoughtful of your disaster donors when you think about media targeting. So in the midst of a disaster, when you're trying to get that second gift, or when you're going back because certain donors have only given during disasters, you want to have that as a media audience you go after, while at the same time not targeting them and trying to engage and retain them like you would your normal donors, because that can dramatically increase your costs if they don't demonstrate willingness to convert. Then we also think about your targeting as it relates to geographic targeting. You might have too narrow of a geographic window during certain emergencies, or if you pull back from that emergency response, you might want to be really conscious of narrowing in your geographic response rates for these donors, because once again, it's typically a good sign of their willingness to be retained as a long-term donor. Then the other thing we like to layer on top of that is philanthropic giving. So if they are just that emotional responsive donor, have they typically given and supported other organizations, in which case there's an opportunity to potentially engage them. If not, then it might you might want to segment that group out. There could still be an opportunity to convert them, but once again, you might want to spend a little bit less money, look for lower cost CPMs as you're trying to engage them. And then finally, factoring in how much they're giving really can be another segmenting piece for your media targeting. Because we spend time, and we've showed some examples so far of emails and direct mail that's going out, but rest assured, media is a huge part of not only how we acquire donors, but as you're acquiring donors through paid social and through display and search efforts. It is very, very critical that you factor in these channels for your retention approaches for them. If somebody decided to give to you off of Facebook, we'd say that it's a pretty bad practice to expect that you're going to retain and get a second gift and maximize your value with relationship value with them by just emailing them or by starting to send them mail. Doesn't mean we don't want to bring these channels in, but also stay closely attached to the channels that you were initially able to engage them with.
So we've talked about the bump. We talked about the surge in gifts that come in initially. Then what we do in terms of acknowledging, in terms of going after a second gift, and then the question is, what happens if you've done that? You've gone for the second gift. They still haven't responded. What do you do next? And again, you need to be able to analyze them as a segment, because we've segmented them out in all of our performance results and tracking. And if they're not responding for that second gift, that doesn't mean that they're not valuable and you should just toss them aside as saying they were one and dones. What you should be doing is you should be treating them really as warm prospects in what would be your regular acquisition appeals. And also stick to the channel that the disaster gift came in. So if they came in through your digital, your website, they would probably best respond in that channel, since that's where they consumed the information and that was their preference. If it was through direct mail, you need to come up with some more print media type content to try to secure that gift going forward. But don't forget about them, and always put them in that, set them aside for any of those disaster donors. They will respond well during another disaster, and make sure you're continuing to try to cultivate and target in an intentional way. Don't think that they're going to ever necessarily get back to being a mission. If they do, great. But when emergency arises, reach out and with relevant need and ask, and try to activate them and get them to give another gift.
So, a couple of examples of doing this. That once again, Salesian Missions. 6 months after hurricane had hit Puerto Rico, to go back to these disaster donors and give them an update on where things are, and most importantly, one second, buddy, almost done. Well, we're getting the full COVID experience here. So, you kind of see this called out. 6 months later, the world has moved on. We might assume that no news is good news. Sadly, nothing is further from the truth. The people of Puerto Rico still desperately need your help. That's a way to reconnect with what originally caused them to give, and where they might continue to want to support all the work that the organization's doing there. Same thing can apply for your organization. Next example. This was a really unique campaign we did with the Salvation Army, where they had individuals that had responded to a variety of disasters, but had not given in 12 plus months and had never given to anything but disasters. And so we developed a media placements along with some emails that was really trying to convert these disaster donors by working off of a campaign that was kind of everyday disasters. And the fact that, yes, and think about it in COVID terms, yes, there are still people that need food and are hungry. There's still, reasons why we need healthcare breakthroughs, and there's reasons why, people that are in desperate need of financial assistance, organizations are there for them. And so we were able to package together this type of campaign, and they were actually able to convert 8% of those donors that had not given in 12 plus months and previously only responded to disasters by just joining in this, kind of everyday disaster. We're here to help rebuild lives.
So just to recap, and we want to be able to answer questions and have time for that, but it is possible to convert new donors acquired during the crisis. And so as we're going through it now, start that planning for identifying these people so that you can track them going forward. Also, look for those people who gave you the 4 and 5-figure gifts, and identify them and spend some extra time and escalate them as quickly as possible into your mid-major, knowing who they are, knowing what their connection or lack of connection is, but trying to really educate them about the mission in a more personal way, and treat them with kid gloves. Be intentional with your messaging going forward. Don't forget that they are driven by emotion, not necessarily mission. So identifying who they are and what their motivation is, will help you to forge a message that will get them to respond again. And then ask for the second gift as soon as you can, maintaining the connection of reminding them why they gave in the first place through the crisis, and that you know who they are and why they gave, and that their support is still needed. And then the key for me through all of this is learning is based on planning, right? And planning is about being able to segment these people so that going forward, you know who they are, you know why they gave, and then going forward, you can treat them and identify what it is that will be that cure, that magic bullet going forward for taking donors who only had a 5% renewal rate maybe 2 years ago, and taking these donors that you're acquiring now and get your more typical second gift rate up to the 15, 20, 25, 30, 35% rate that you typically see.
Thank you, Andy. So you mentioned GIF rate, which flows right into this question of what percent of donors should I expect to convert into mission donors?
Well, one thing that will vary is depending on what channel you acquire them. Digital, I would say, is probably lower, just because in a typical normal day and time, the digital channel doesn't respond for a second gift as strongly as in direct mail. I think, again, part of it is because those digital donors are more reactionary. It's a much more reactionary channel in the first place. But I have seen response rates go up to, in that first category of second gift to be converted to mission, in the 15 to 20% range. And then as emergency donors getting a second gift, even higher than that. You can get up into the 30, 35% of them to give a second gift based on how you're treating them and when you solicit.
And I would just add on that really quick, when we look at things, not every disaster donors the same. So expect much, much lower response rates for those that are, if they're engaging with you and your service, you have a service area or region and they're engaging way outside of that. Digitally speaking, we oftentimes can attract a lot of those donors and they can be quick to respond. I gave examples earlier, but at the same time, if you have a donor that is you can relate back your mission and what you're doing on an ongoing basis with them. We've seen really high response rates on that front, both through email and media.
Yeah, and Jared makes a great point about regional. If you're a regional donor, when he gave that example of the media, those were donors that gave to Hurricane Harvey down in Texas, but resided in our client's region in Southern California. So we were soliciting them for gifts in the Southern California region. We knew they knew about Salvation Army. We knew that they had given to a Salvation Army cause, and they know that, so it was about not just converting them from emergency donors, but actually converting them to California donors. So it really can vary depending on niche and regional versus national donors.
Another question we've got is, you mentioned sticking with the donation channel, but what if they gave online in response to a mail campaign?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And, the world of attribution has become a much bigger and larger topic. And we've done some studying just on regular donors in this case. And what we've seen is donors who have given through online as a reply device, so to speak, those donors behave most like other direct mail donors. And they're just using the online website as a reply device. They typically will take being communicated in both channels, and you need to have a multi-channel communication going forward with those people, because you know that they're conversing in both channels. But I would say they're much more, their metrics behave much more towards a direct mail metric, meaning they need that direct mail media content.
And then last question I'll cover for this time is, how much should I be communicating with these disaster donors after their first gift?
Go ahead, Jared.
I was just going to say, I think, what we touched on, definitely get acknowledgement out, in the channel that they gave in. But a lot of that is going to determine based upon the length of this, the emergency or disaster that you're in. I mean, I would say right now, depending upon as you're getting information, you can communicate very frequently. I mean, you can be sending, a message to these donors every week or every couple of weeks, giving them some level of insight into what's happening. Once again, trying to go back to this idea of building that trust and confidence in you as an organization, because we know that is such a key determining factor in somebody's decision on who and where to give their money to. So, as you can do it, feel free, like I said, don't be afraid to come back and ask for another gift, but you would want to factor that into your, if you're trying to come up with a formula on how many messages I can send, we would say, you don't want to just keep asking them for money, week after week after week. You can mix those in, but really give them information, acknowledge them, thank them, share with them what's happening and how you as an organization are evolving or adjusting and providing the resources and solutions that people need during this response. And so, I think that it's a combination of what you have to say and how long the crisis is riding out. And I would say with the current COVID crisis we're in, you can have multiple messages. You can be sending out digitally 4, 5, 6 messages as we look at this thing coming along with information and acknowledgments and things.
And I would say from a direct mail standpoint, it really depends on your your level of investment threshold, your investment threshold, which is if you consider them warm prospects, how are they behaving against what other lists you might be sending out in your acquisition and the expected return and what you're looking for a long-term net. And when I say that, look at it from a long-term net perspective, meaning the fact that they've given you a gift, probably if you can get them to give a mission gift beyond that, those people will probably have a better reactivation rate going forward than what you would typically get from an outside cold list. And I also want to say something else, which is that we have a food bank right now that after their first gift, they're going out for monthly giving. And so, and getting some of those donors to give as a sustainer. So, don't be afraid if it's still through in this window. And that's the beauty of digital, is just how quickly you can get back to them, that you can still reach out to them as this news has sort of just been building and building. They've gone out for a second gift ask and converted them to monthly giving. So, there's a lot of opportunity for testing messaging and segmenting, but that's the key, is just really identifying the group and do your analysis and demand that analysis from knuckleheads like me. So it really does require you really being thoughtful with them going forward.
Awesome. I think that's a perfect way to tie it up. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And I know you guys are all very busy right now, working from home or maybe handling things at your organization. And so thank you for joining us. We have 2 more webinars this month. What to do now that event revenue is gone, and preparing for an economic downturn. So 2 more webinars that can help you think about, the long term and what to do and how to prepare as we all come out of this crisis in the future. And if you haven't registered already, you can register at rkdgroup.com/webinars. And that is it. And thank you all for joining, and have a great day.
Appreciate it, guys.